All right, everyone say good morning. I'm sorry that we got a little bit of a later start. A little carried away with Mesilas Yishar. I have to write to the Hachsek people. There's no way it's 5 minutes a day. It's false advertising. Or maybe it's me. Maybe it's me. I shouldn't say that. All right. So let's get started. Thank you again to all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev. Josh and Becker Friedman for dedicating all the Sherman Joshua this month. Leili Nishmas, Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda. Ben Rav Chaim Rafael Zichron Levracha. To thank Semi and Malka Esterson for dedicating all the shurim this month in memory of their parents. Yitzchak Lev Ben Aaron HaKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, Hinda Bas Henech Ephraim, and for the continued Hatzlacha and Gesund of Mr. Esterson at Me'eve Esrim Shalom Tovos. To thank the Pepper family for dedicating all the shurim this month in commemoration of the yard site of Yosef Pepper, Yosef David Zichron Levracha Ben Yaakov. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Steve Galaskov, in honor of his daughter Rivi's wedding to Eli Bogart, which will take place tonight. B'sha'a tova u'metzlacha, Steve, mazel tov. And commemoration of his father's upcoming yard site in Neshama Shadav and Aliyah. And the Week of Learning sponsors the Pepper family in the merit of Rafuah Shlema for Yaakov ben Rachel. We hope that he, together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, will have a complete and enduring refuah. Rabbosai, we have a lot to do today. Today's daf is Lamed Zayin 37. We are picking up at Lamed Vav Amud Beis 36b, and we are picking up 5 lines up from. No, impossible. Okay, all right, fine. Esvei, fine. We'll do Esvei. Good. Now let's say Esvei. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Nah, are you sure? Are you sure? All right, fine. 14 lines up from the bottom. I'll say, let's go. It goes quickly. I mean, not really, but okay. Esvei, Torem es trumosav es masrosav ladaito. So we'll say, so remember again, we were dealing with an interesting question. The overarching question we were dealing with in yesterday's daf was halacha l'maisa. Are you permitted to go ahead and take meiser or take truma for someone else's produce without their das? So we'll say, so remember again. The way we framed the question was as follows: that halacha l'maisa, could I go over to someone else's produce, tithe it without their knowledge or without their consent? What were the two tzadim? The two tzadim were number one, on one hand, zachan la'adam shelo b'fanav, right? I'm doing something objectively good. On the other hand, I'm depriving them of a mitzvah. So the Gemara tried to analyze this particular question, ultimately again through the lens of our Mishnah, where Reuven made a neder not to confer any benefit to Shimon, and yet the Mishnah said that Reuven has the ability to take truma from Shimon's produce. Now, we'll say, so we're trying to analyze what's that case. What's the case? Is it a case of Reuven using his own produce to tithe Shimon's produce? Is it Reuven's produce? Is it Shimon's produce from Shimon's? So we're trying to analyze this. The Gemara says as follows: Esvei, Torah mes trumosav es masrosav ladaito. So the Mishnah said, Reuven has the ability to go ahead and tithe Shimon's produce ladaito with Shimon's consent. The Amrit Tovas Hana de Balakri. So remember, in the last thing we're leaving off with. So if we say that halacha l'maisa nabosei, we transition into a discussion about Tovas Hana. Let's assume for a moment that one person is able to go ahead and take truma on behalf of another. Who gets the Tovas Hana? Tovas Hana being what Rabbi? Who gets to decide which Kohen to give the truma to? So if you say that Tovas Hana goes to the actual owner of the produce which is being tithed, Hakama Hanilei, then ultimately again, so Reuven is doing something that gives benefit to Shimon. Elishmamina Tovas Hana delay Amri. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Rather, it turns out that halacha l'maisa, maybe Tovas Hana, the ability to choose which Kohen gets the truma, who does that go to? That goes to Reuven, the tither, and not to Shimon, the owner of the produce who is being tithed. To which the Gemara says, lo, misha balakri, al shabalakri. No, maybe not. Maybe the case of the Mishnah Rabbi is like this. The case of the Mishnah is ultimately, again, where it's Shimon's produce being tithed, and the tithe itself is being separated from Shimon's actual produce. Uladaito the balakri. And ultimately, and what does it mean, ladaito, with his consent? With the consent of Shimon. And Abba says, this goes back to what we saw yesterday, and yesterday's Zaf Rava said, Ba'omer, kalarotze litrom, yavov yitrom. And Abba say, what's the case? The case is where Shimon made an announcement. What's the announcement? whoever wants to come and tithe my property or take truma from my property, come and take truma from my property. In which case, when Reuven comes and does it, is that a form of hana'ah? Is Reuven giving Shimon hana'ah? No. Why not? Because if Reuven doesn't do it, someone else is going to come and do it. So Tashma, Rabbi Yochanan, Hamakdish Mosif Chomesh. We'll say when you go ahead and you redeem something, and then when you consecrate something, and when you want to redeem it, ultimately you have to redeem it plus an additional fifth. Umiskaper oset temura, and the one ultimately again who is achieving kapara through the carbon has the ability to affect temura. And here's the part that we're focused on: Vatore mishalo al she'enu shalo tovas hana'a shalo. So I will say now the Gemara ends off and says, furthermore, when you separate out produce for someone else's pile of grain, but you're using your own produce to separate out truma. So just to illustrate what that means, right? Shimon has a pile of wheat that needs to have truma separated. Reuven does it on his behalf, but Reuven designates his own produce as truma portion for Shimon's pile of grain, right? So halacha l'maisav tar mishalo al she'eno shalo tovas hana shalo. Who gets the tovas hana? Who gets to decide which kohen it goes to? Ultimately, again, the separator, the actual tither himself, or in this particular case, that will be Reuven. So I will say, so halacha l'maisa. So the way we paskin, I will say, is that Torib es she'eno shalo. The Rambam paskins in Hilchos Trumos Perek Dalet Halacha Beis. So I will say two questions I want to answer. Question number one is: can you tithe on behalf of someone without their knowledge? Just in general, is that a permitted practice or not? So the Rambam paskins over here, he says, Torib es she'eno shalo birshus bailim. You cannot go ahead and tithe someone else's produce without their knowledge. Without their knowledge, right? That's the halacha. That's the halacha. Now, however, what happens if you do have someone's permission? For example, about Torib mishalo. So now, what that means? Hatorib es she'eno shalo birshus habaylim. Now, what that means is like this. Let me clarify this. So what that means is, I go over to Reuven has a pile of grain, right? I can't walk into Reuven's granary and separate out truma from his crop without his knowledge. What can I do? What can I do? I could decide, I love Reuven. I know he's been struggling. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to use some of my own produce as the truma designation for Reuven's produce. So again, essentially what I'm doing is, what am I essentially doing? Right? I'm depriving him of a mitzvah that is true, but what else am I doing? Right? In other words, I'm saving him a good amount of money. I'm saving him 1/10, ultimately, or some, well, no, it's not a tenth, not a tenth. Or I'm saving him some amount, ultimately, again, of his produce. Rambam Paskins, you could do that. Why? Because essentially, remember again, this was a clash between what? Mitzvah deprivation and zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. It turns out that ultimately using your own produce to go ahead and satisfy someone else's truma obligation is a zechus. Is a benefit, and therefore I could do it. Great. Now what's question number two? What's question number two? No, without his consent. With his consent, there's nothing to talk about. Then I'm a shliach. Right? That's not a question. It's only without consent. Only without consent. So I could do it without his consent. Shabbos says, so now listen to this. So now what's question number two? Fine. So now I'm allowed to do it. What's now the question? Who gets to determine which Kohen gets the truma? To which the Rambam paskins, Avalatori mishalo al shalacherim hareze truma v'tikim peroseim. So like you just said, I could use my own produce to set aside truma on Reuven's produce, even without his knowledge and consent. Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. Here we go. The tovas hana shalo. Who gets the tovas hana? Who gets to determine which coin he gets to? Me, the separator, the tither, which makes sense. Because at the end of the day, since I am the one who is actually separating and determining truma, it makes sense, even though it's on Reuven's produce, it makes sense that lamaisa, I get to choose which kohen gets it. So therefore, that's why I pass on both levels. You could tithe, you could take your own produce, designated as true on someone else's produce, even without their knowledge. Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, and I, the actual tither, have the right to determine which kohen gets it. Incredible. Well, let's go. Malamdo mikra halachos va'agados va'alo yilamdenu mikra. So Rabbi says, remember again. So the Mishnah, remember, back to Mishnah's case. Rabbi says, Mishnah's case is very simple. Reuven made a neder. What's Reuven's neder? He's not going to confer hana upon Shimon. Our Mishnah then went through the various cases in which what? A person is permitted to go ahead and confer, a person is permitted to do certain things. One of the things that Reuven is permitted to do is that Reuven is permitted to go ahead and teach Shimon, medrash, halachos, and agados. What can't he teach him? Chumash. Okay, so it says Gemara, Mikra my time alo yilamdenu. Why can't Reuven teach Shimon Chumash? Rabbi says this is very, very, very interesting. Mishum to kamahanile. What do you mean? Because the act of teaching, Rav Reuven teaching Chumash to Shimon, Rabbi say is a form of hana. It's a form of hana, right? He's giving him a service. He's providing him a service. It's hana. To which the Gemara says, but 1 second, medrash not become a hanile. I don't understand. Teaching him any Torah is providing a beneficial service, right? So why are you prohibiting the teaching of Chumash and not prohibiting the teaching of something else, of medrash? Rabbi Shmuel is very interesting. B'makom shenotlin schar al hamikra ve'enotlin schar al hamedrash. Fascinating. We're talking about a place where it was customary to get paid for teaching someone Chumash, but you don't get paid for teaching someone medrash. So now say now it makes sense. So therefore, when Reuven teaches Shimon medrash or anything else for that matter, besides Chumash, he's not providing him a service. Why is he not providing him a service? Because we'll say, remember again, Shimon could have gotten this anywhere because no one charges for the teaching of Torah in these areas. So therefore, again, Reuven didn't provide a service. However, again, if you do get charged normally again for the learning of Chumash, then for Mikra, then ultimately again, if Reuven does it for Shimon free of charge, that is considered to be a hana. A hana. So the Gemara says, my paska, let's say, why is there a distinction over here between, in other words, what's this pshat? What's the pshat with not charging for medrash, but charging for chumash? My paska means, how do you know to make that distinction? So this is actually quite interesting. Top of Lamed Zayin. So the Gemara says, Hai ka'akamash malon, dafilu b'makom shenotlin schar ala mikra, shari lemishkal, al hamedrash lo shari lemishkal. Wow. So the Gemara says like this. The Mishnah is actually teaching us a fascinating principle, which is you are never, if you live in a place where teachers of Torah charge to teach Chumash, that's okay. That's permitted. You can't charge for the learning of Medrash. By the way, both say in this context, Medrash means like Torah Shabbal Peh. Torah Shabbal Peh. Right? Medrash doesn't mean like we think about a Medrash like a story. Right? Medrash can mean like Gemara. Medrash can mean just Torah Shabbal Peh. Any part of the oral law. So we'll say, so the Gemara says, the Mishnah is teaching us, you could charge. It's possible, it's permitted to charge for teaching Chumash. It's not permitted to charge money for the teaching of Medrash. So the Gemara says, Maishna Medrash Dalo, why not? Why not? What's wrong with going ahead and charging for Medrash? So this is incredible. So the Gemara says, this is incredible. Vosit Siv Hashem Ba'isehi Lelamed Eschem. Shabbos, get ready for this. Moshe Rabbeinu tells Klal Yisrael, and Hashem commanded me to teach you. Then I will say, what did Hashem command Moshe to teach Klal Yisrael? The pasuk goes on and says, Chukim Mishpatim Lasoschem Osam Baris. So teach you Chukim Mishpatim. Then I will say, what was Moshe Rabbeinu teaching Klal Yisrael? What was he teaching them? What we call Medrash, Torah Shabbal Peh. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu received everything, and he was teaching them again. Rabbi say, not that which was written in the Chumash. Doesn't need to teach them that. That they're going to get. They can see it on their own. He's teaching them the Perush, which is Medrash. So get ready for this. Rabbi say. So Re'eli Marati Yesem Chugim Mishpatim Kashet Tzivani Hashem. So the Chazal say, or Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ma'ani Bechinam. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu says, I am teaching you Klal Yisrael without charge. Af atem nami bechinam. Ultimately, again, when you teach Medrash in subsequent generations, it must be done without a charge as well. So I'll say, so isn't this incredible? Right? Moshe Rabbeinu didn't get paid for the teaching of Medrash. So too, again, halacha l'maisa, future generations, when teaching Medrash, you can't get paid. To which the Gemara says, but 1 second, mikro nami bechinam. But I don't understand. Come on. When Moshe Rabbeinu says, I've taught you chukim mishpatim, the truth is, it's not just Medrash. It's also what? It's also mikra. It's also Chumash. So really, according to this, this becomes the model of Ma'ani Bechinam, Af Atem Bechinam, which I have a beautiful Baba Rebbe to tell you, but Okay, we're gonna get a little bit further first. Let's say, so listen to this. So this concept of I didn't charge when I taught you Torah, so you can't charge when you teach Torah. But in reality, that principle should devolve upon all forms of Torah, even Mikra. So we'll say this is incredible. The Gemara says you're right. But the difference is when teaching Mikra, a Rebbe is actually not getting paid for the teaching of Chumash. What is he getting paid for? Ancillary services. Rav Amar Schar Shimur. They both say, what is he getting paid for? Babysitting. Babysitting, right? Because Mikra is often taught to children, and therefore the Rebbe has an obligation of classroom management. He's keeping the kids off the streets, right? So there's a service that's being provided. One could apply this to certain adults as well, right? But Lamaisa again, right? This is Schar Shimur. So it's fascinating. So the Rebbe is not getting paid for the teaching of Chumash. He's getting paid ultimately again for watching the kids. Schar Shimur. So Rabbi Yochanan says no. What is he getting paid for? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Schar Pisuk Ta'amim. Interesting. He's getting paid, Rabbi say, for teaching the kids Trup. Pisuk Ta'amim, Rabbi say, actually means Trup, and also we're going to see it also can mean where the psukim begin and end, right? The cutoff of the psukim, which are also interesting. So that's what the Rebbe is really teaching them, or that's what he's getting paid for. The Trup, not the actual psukim itself, but Trup. So Rabbi say, it's interesting. You know, when we learn Chumash here, I say we being like America, rarely is Chumash taught with Trup. In Eretz Yisrael, especially the Zubrim method, there are many methods that Dafka teach Chumash with Trup, because again, those who know Trup, do not really include myself amongst them, understand that the Trup, Seth is here, Seth could speak to this, right? Often the Trup itself is vital in the understanding of the actual psukim. You see, we think that Trup is just a way to read. It's not true. Trup, Rashi will often comment on the Trup associated with a particular word, and that'll help the understanding of it. So Lamaisa, again, the Gemara suggests that when a Rebbe gets paid for teaching Chumash, he's not getting paid for teaching Chumash, he's getting paid for teaching Trup. So I'll say, so these are the two opinions as to what a Rebbe gets paid for. So let's analyze this a little bit. If you take a look at the Ran, just very quickly, Rebbe will say the Ran in the intermediate lines, 4 lines up from before the intermediate lines end, the Ran says, Rav Amar Schar Shimur, de Mistama, Lom de Mikra Ketanim, Utzrichen Shimur, Umishum Hachi Nihid da Agar Limud Asar Schar Shimur Shari. So even though, again, the Rebbe can't charge per se for the teaching of Chumash, he does charge for watching the kids. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Schar Pisuk Tamim, Shemalam Din Lahem Tamim, Delavmi Da'oraisaninhu, Hilchach, Lohavi Bichlal Chug. Mishrat, and I will say, the Gemara is taking the position right now that the concept of Trup is not Mid'araisa. We're going to challenge that later on Amud Beis, but Lamaisa, that's what the Rebbe is getting charged. That's what the Rebbe is charging for, the teaching of Trup. Incredible. So let's analyze it also. So Bishtom Laman Damer Schar Pisuk Ta'amim. Shabbos says, so now let's plug this back into our Mishnah. So therefore, let's go back. So what was our Mishnah? Reuven says to Shimon, Konem Hana Ascha Alai, or I should say, Konem Hana Asya Lecha. Right? Reuven says you can't get any benefit from me, Shimon. So what did the Mishnah say? But Reuven could teach Shimon Torah. He could teach him Medrash, Halacha, Agada. What can't he teach him? Mikra, Chumash. Why? Because it was customary to get paid for Chumash. Now we'll say, now let's refine that a little bit. What were you getting paid for when you taught Chumash? Machlokes. Either babysitting, right? Watching the kids, or Trup. So let's analyze this. So Bishlama, Leman Damar Schar Pisuk Tam Hainudlo Yamdenu. So according to the opinion that says that a Rebbe would get paid for teaching Trup when it comes to Chumash, I understand then why Reuven, back to the Mishnah, Reuven can't go ahead and teach Chumash to Shimon because he's providing Shimon with an objective benefit. Elaman Da'amar Shimur, Schar Shimur, Gadol Bar Shimuru. So we're going to say, well, 1 second. But according to the opinion that says that what you get paid for when you teach Chumash is what? Babysitting. So the Mishnah is talking about a case of adults, right? Does an adult need babysitting? So if that's the case, right, why wouldn't Reuven be able to teach Chumash to Shimon? To which the Gemara says, Bakatan Katani. Right, the case the Mishnah both say is where Reuven is an adult and Shimon is a kid. Ika ig bekatan ema seifa. Aval Malamed is ban of mikra, but katan bar banamu. But see, here's the problem. How does the Mishnah end? Even though Reuven can't teach Shimon Chumash, he could teach Shimon's kids Chumash. If we're talking about a katan, does a katan have kids? So the Gemara says, you're right. In reality, there is a piece of the Mishnah that is missing, and one we now have to go ahead and fill in. So Shabbos said, what do we have to fill in? Here we go. Lo yilamdenu mikra bikatan. Shabbos say, ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa. If Shimon was a katan and Reuven made the neder, not to allow Shimon to get any benefit from him, so Reuven can't teach Shimon chumash. Im haya gadol. However, again, if Shimon was an adult, melamdo lo ulabanav mikra, then Reuven could teach chumash even to Shimon. Why? Because remember again, the schar associated with chumash is what? What's the schar associated with it? Schar shimor, babysitting, and that issue only applies to kids, doesn't apply to adults. So Einachinami, if Reuven made a neder prohibiting himself from giving any benefit to Shimon, they're both adults, Reuven could teach chumash even to Shimon. Incredible. So Messi, let's analyze this. So just to point out where we're holding right now in our discussion. So the way we're framing this now is that halacha l'maisa, the case in the Mishnah that says that Reuven could teach medrash agada halacha to Shimon, but not chumash, would be talking about a case where Shimon is a katan. Shimon is a katan. But if Shimon were to be an adult, even teaching him chumash would be permitted. Why? Because the reward, or I should say, the payment that comes for chumash is schar shimor, is babysitting, and obviously that's only a benefit if it's a katan, not a benefit if it's a gadol. Where we're holding also right now, Abosai, is that it is prohibited to receive compensation for teaching Torah. That's where we're up to. Whether ultimately, again, that is mikra or that's other forms of Torah, one cannot receive compensation ultimately, again, for teaching Torah. So the Gemara says, meisvei. I will say, by the way, I'll just point out, if you look, because it's right here, you see right across in the Ran on the left-hand side, the Ran says over, you see it, ule'inyan halacha, it's bolded. Look what the Ran writes here. I will say, ule'inyan halacha, kaimalan hachi, da'ala medrash lo shari l'mishkal. So I will say, the way we paskin says around halacha l'mais, we'll see this in the Rambam, is that you can't get paid for teaching Torah. Well, that's interesting, right? So I'll say, so what about people who happen to have a parnasa, right, that involves teaching Torah? So what happens to those folks? So I'll say, we're going to get into this discussion. Mihu hani mili schar limud aval agar batala shari. I will say, what we're going to see is that when one teaches Torah and receives a salary, that salary is not viewed halachically as a salary for teaching Torah. What that's viewed is essentially lost wages. Let's say a person is a Rebbe, person teaches Torah, right? If that person weren't teaching Torah, then what? They could do something else. They could pursue another career. What the community is saying is, we don't want you to pursue another career. We want you to focus on that. And therefore, we'll pay you lost wages. So it's interesting. So the salary, so to speak, of a Rebbe, or the salary of someone who teaches Torah, ultimately, again, is not viewed as a salary for teaching Torah. It's viewed as a salary for lost wages, which Rabbi say is such a beautiful way also like to look at a Rebbe, right? Because sometimes they say, oh, that's your job, right? That's what you do. No, what it's saying is you could be doing anything in the world. But we value the Rebbe. It's such a wonderful way to look like at our Rebbeim. We value the Rebbe so much that we don't want you doing something else. We don't want you to think about this. The next time, like you have PTA conferences, right? Not PTA conferences, what are they called? Teacher conferences, right? You think about this just a moment. Like, we value you so much that we don't want you doing something else, so we're paying you wages not to go ahead and trade stocks, not to sell real estate, not to be a doctor, not to be a lawyer, not to be an accountant. We don't want you to do those things because the service you provide to our community is so much more valuable. Such a different way. It's almost like we're buying them out of a different kind of career in order for them to be able to focus on this. Such a beautiful idea. There's much more involved with this halachically, but again, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, let's go. So meisvei tinokos lo korn b'tchil b'Shabbos. Well, this is so beautiful. Listen to this. Children should not be taught new material on Shabbos. Okay? Children should not be taught new material on Shabbos. Right? So the Gemara says, Ella, shonin berishin. As long as they learn something at least once before Shabbos, they could review that. So in other words, for children, when they learn on Shabbos, learning on Shabbos should be chazara. should be review. We don't teach them anything new. So we'll say, why is this? So we'll say, the assumption over here is, who are the children learning with? Who are they learning with? A Rebbe. So bishlam leman damer schar pisuk ta'amim hainu dein korim b'tchila b'Shabbos. So we'll say, so I understand, at the end of the day, if you tell me that the payment that a Rebbe gets, ultimately, again, is because he teaches them trup, that halacha l'maisa, you can't do that on Shabbos. That makes sense. Why? Because Rabbi say, then on Shabbos, the Rebbe is really working, because the time that you really learn the trup is the first time you're learning the pasuk. If you look at the Ran for just a moment, the Ran says, it's 5 lines up from the bottom. So he says, because Rabbi say, if you're getting paid to teach the kid, if you hold that payment is for the trup, the real ikar avoda, the real ikar work, is the first time the kid learns the pasuk. So therefore, if we allow children to learn new things on Shabbos, that means what? The Rebbe is getting paid for services rendered on Shabbos. And I will say, now this is not even about getting paid for teaching Torah. What is this now about? Getting paid for work done on Shabbos. I will say, you can't get paid for work done on Shabbos. So now again, let's just go back for just a moment. What do we have? We have a statement. The statement is, we don't have a Rebbe teach a kid new material on Shabbos. So why? See if you understand, when a Rebbe teaches a child Chumash, the money that he's getting is for teaching them trup. So the Iker Avoda with teaching trup is new material. So now I understand the Rebbe can't do that on Shabbos. Why? Because the Rebbe's working on Shabbos then. He's getting paid for work done on Shabbos. That makes sense. Ella, Leban Domer Schar Shimur, Amai in Kar Metchil B'Shabbos. But I will say, if at the end of the day, the Rebbe is getting paid for babysitting, then Lemais, again, what does it matter if they're learning new material or if they're reviewing old material? It's all the same thing. To which the Gemara says, Va'amai shonin barishon. So the Gemara says, Ha'ikos schar shimur de Shabbos. Uletamech. Let's analyze this for just a moment. Uletamech. Schar pisuk b'Shabbos mi aser. I'll say further, let's go further a little bit. What would be wrong if a Rebbe, even if you understand that when a Rebbe gets paid for Chumash, he's getting paid ultimately for teaching them trup. So what's wrong with teaching them new material on Shabbos? I was saying, what's wrong with that? After all, it's still not going to be a problem. Why? Havlahi. Oh my gosh. I was saying, there's so much happening in one day. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I will say, Havlah means what? Havlah means, in general, there's a concept that work could be done on Shabbos as long as the payment for that work is absorbed into weekday activity. So I will say, so a simple example of this is, a Rebbe could teach on Shabbos, but he's getting paid. He's getting paid, but there's an understanding that Shabbos work also required weekday preparation and is included in a general overall payment. So I will say, the issue of getting paid for something on Shabbos is only when it's what we'll call stand-alone Shabbos payment. But if the Shabbos payment is absorbed into a more general payment, then Allah Alamais, it's not a problem of Schar Shabbos. Here we go. We'll say, here we go. Disanyo, hasocher, now this is non-Torah examples, but interesting nevertheless. Hasocher es hapoa lishmor es hatinok. We'll say, I hire a babysitter. I hire a worker to go ahead and watch a child. Or lishmor es hapara, or to watch my cow. Interesting, I like that. It's grouped together. Right, so again, watch my kid, watch my cow. Lishmor es hazroim, watch my field. Well, the idea over here is, I'm hiring someone to watch stuff. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Ein nosten lo schar Shabbos. Right now, we'll say, I'll just point out, by the way, all these cases have to do with para aduma. Right? The Ran points out over here, remember again, we'll say, we've seen this concept that there were children who were raised in like these separate cities, these separate courtyards, away from any possibility of Tumah in order to participate ultimately again in the Para Aduma service. Or again, sometimes they would guard wheat or barley for the Karban Omer separate and distinct. So the idea is you're hiring people to watch these things. So what's the halacha bosai? Ein nos schar Shabbos. Now bosai, if the way these workers were hired is they received a daily wage, you get paid for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, can't do that. You cannot receive a separate wage for Shabbos. Ein nos schar Shabbos. Lefichach, Amud Beis, lefichach. Im avdu, eino chayiv ba'achriyusan. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, Im avdu means ultimately, again, if the object was lost, and hopefully not the kid. They'll say, but Lamaisa again, let's say they lost the cow on Shabbos, they're not going to be chayiv. We'll say, why are they not chayiv? Because also remember again, on Shabbos, ultimately again, such a person like that is not called a shomer sachar. At most, they're called a shomer chinam, an unpaid watchman. And the unpaid watchman, Rabbi say, is not chayiv for geneva va'aveda, is not chayiv for items that are stolen or lost. Incredible. Eno chayiv b'achar yusan. V'imhaya schir Shabbos, schir chodesh, schir shana, schir shavua. But Rabbi say, if a person was hired for a duration, Rabbi say, of a Shabbos. Shabbos means I was hired for a week, right? Or I was hired for a month, or for a year, or for 7 years. Then Rabbi say, then no schar Shabbos. Then I could get paid for Shabbos. So Rabbi say, this is the concept of havla, a very common concept for people who do provide certain services on Shabbos. How do you pay a person ultimately, again, for services rendered on Shabbos? It's permitted as long as it is absorbed in a greater compensation package. So as long as a person is getting paid for a week of activity. So in other words, what you can't get is, okay, you work 3 hours on Shabbos, here's $30. That you can't do. That you can't do. But if I'm getting a week's worth of wages for a service, well, say obviously we're talking about a service which is permitted to be performed on Shabbos. That's why the Gemara used the example of a shomer. Someone's just watching stuff. That's permitted on Shabbos. So as long as my compensation package ultimately, again, has what we'll call monetary absorption. So it absorbs weekday compensation, Shabbos compensation, then it's totally fine. Lefichach, im avdu chai b'achar yusan. Rabbi said, in a case like that, so if I were to lose the cow on Shabbos, assuming, let's say I'm hired for a month, if I were to lose the cow on Shabbos, so what Rabbi say? I'd be chayiv. Why would I be chayiv? Because in that case, interestingly enough, on Shabbos, I have the status of a shomer sachar, a paid custodian. And therefore, again, I am chayiv for geneva va'aveda. So Rabbi say, so now let's bring this full circle. So now let's go back for just a second. So I don't understand. A Rebbe is hired, let's call it a Rebbe's on a yearly salary. So if a Rebbe's on a yearly salary, why can't he teach new material on Shabbos? Right? So remember, I will say the Brisa said, on Shabbos, a Rebbe can't teach new material. A Rebbe can only review with his Talmidim. So we're trying to understand why that is. So the Gemara says, so I will say, we assume, what is it because of? If it's because of Pasuk Tamim or Shimur, what are you saying? It's a problem of we thought it's a problem of Schar Shabbos. The Rebbe is providing a service on Shabbos and he's getting paid for it. You're not allowed to do that. Yes, you can. Because the Rebbe's compensation package, Rabbi say, spans an extended amount of time. Anytime your compensation package spans an extended amount of time, you're allowed to do stuff on Shabbos as well. And it's not considered to be called, we allow the Shabbos compensation to be absorbed into the weekday compensation. If that's the case, why can't the Rebbe teach new material? Rabbi say, get ready for this heartwarming, beautiful, and incredible answer. Elagabe Shabbos hainu taima de'in karim betchila mishum deyifnu avosum dienuki limitzvasa deshabsa. Because Rabbi say we want fathers to ultimately, again, be involved in the mitzvah of Shabbos. Now, what does that mean? Rabbi say, look at this beautiful Ran. The Ran says, first short line, deyifnu avu and dienuka limitzvasa deshabsa sha'avos hatinokos ponu lemitzvah Shabbos. Rabbi say, fathers who maybe aren't home as much during the week have an opportunity again to celebrate Shabbos with their family. Umishtashin im hatinogos. And Rabbi say, what is Shabbos for? Shabbos is for spending time with your children. Shabbos is for spending time with your children. Now, Rabbi say, if a child, right, if the Rebbe is teaching new material, what does every single father want more than anything for his child? What does every single father want more than anything? I want my child to be a Talmid Chacham. That's what I want. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but that's ultimately what I want. I want them to be great in Torah. When I say Talmid Chacham, I will say, I don't mean necessarily someone who knows everything, because not every child is capable of that. But I mean someone who loves Torah, yearns for Torah, is passionate about Torah, can't get enough Torah. That's what I want for my child. So therefore, again, if at the end of the day, the Rebbe is teaching new material on Shabbos, right? I'm going to make sure that what? My child is there. I don't want him to miss yeshiva if he's learning new material, right? I want him to be caught up. I want him to be on the top. So therefore, I'll say, what is that going to take away from? The father's opportunity to be with his son on Shabbos. Isn't this absolutely beautiful? Chazal understood people work hard, they're all over the place. Spend time with your kids on Shabbos. And I will say this is so incredibly important. People think that a successful Shabbos during the winter, a successful Shabbos is, I was asleep by 8 o'clock. I was asleep by 8 o'clock. That's a success. That's not a successful Shabbos. We'll say it's pathetic. No one needs to go, unless you're above the age of 80, no one needs to go to sleep at 8 o'clock at night. And I'll say, what's Shabbos night for? Shabbos night is you finish the Su'udah after you sing with your children, you say Divrei Torah, and you learn it with your child. It doesn't have to be anything, a couple of minutes. Shabbos is to spend time with my family, because often during the week, I'm all over the place. So during the summer, people think, successful Shabbos, I slept 4 hours on Shabbos. I will say, unless you have mono, you do not need to sleep 4 hours during the day, right? You only sleep 3 hours during the day. I will say, the whole yesod of Shabbos is the ability, and so often, I want to tell you, too often, what people do over Shabbos is they send their kids to friends, right? The kids are out. That's beautiful. Your kids see their friends the entire week, and they should play with their friends on Shabbos also. Have healthy kids. But Shabbos is also a time for a parent to reconnect with their kid, for a parent to spend quality time, whether it's learning or whether it's schmoozing, but to be able to Shabbos is that time to solidify and concretize and re-energize that relationship. And I will say, by the way, over here, if you notice, it's between fathers and sons. Rarely is there a problem between mothers and their children, right? Mothers are pretty good with this kind of stuff. It's fathers often who struggle a bit more to carve out the time to connect in a meaningful way with their children. Shabbos is that time. Shabbos, I will say, I'll just tell you in a reflective way. Take advantage of it when your kids are young. My boys have really not lived at home since high school. Since high school now, Baruch Hashem, they're in Beis Medrash, they're away. They come home a little bit here, a little bit there. And the truth is, you realize that, oh my gosh, when they're young, like those moments that you could just sit together before they're out and about. Because the truth is, once they're out and about, and for many of you, it's going to be high school, right? And some a little bit later, Eretz Yisrael. Once they're out, you never regain that time where you have like unfettered access to them. And it goes by so quickly. So therefore the Gemara says, oh, we have such a beautiful Gemara. So the Gemara says over here, no new material on Shabbos. No new material on Shabbos. Why no new material? So it's incredible. It's not about Schar Shabbos. We think that this is about the Rebbe's salary. This is not the Rebbe's salary. Fathers should spend time with their kids. And so don't introduce new Rebbe. Come, you should learn with the kids, chazar with the kids. No new material. No new material. Because if it's chazara, the father can also do that with the kid, right? And we want families to spend time together on Shabbos. So it's so beautiful. Whole Shas is worth it for a line like that. The other possibility is, Mishum de b'shamsa achlin v'had. This is the other possibility. Mishum de b'shamsa achlin v'shasin v'yakir alein alma. We'll say the other possibility is, on Shabbos, kids, it's about the kids. Kids eat and drink a lot. That will say, now this isn't drinking like drinking. This is just saying what ends up happening on Shabbos is most people, their Shabbos meals are not their weekday meals, meaning you're having a much bigger meal on Shabbos. Shabbos say, whenever you have a different kind of meal, heavier meal, a lot more food, so it throws people off a little bit, right? Shabbos say, so even kids, and therefore kids really aren't holding in a place where they could absorb new information on Shabbos, right? So interestingly enough, so because of that, it's Shabbos is good for Chazara, not good for new information. Kidamar Shmuel Shinui Veses Tchila Cholim Me'ayim. So we'll say it's not Veses like by Hilchos Nida. This means any change of like regularities. In other words, change in diet. Ultimately, again, just throws a person off. We'll say that's why. By the way, again, it's interesting. Shabbos afternoon, all kidding aside, isn't it funny how the thing you yearn more than anything after the Su'udah is a nap, right? Now I will say, on any given Tuesday, at 2 o'clock, you're not like, oh boy, right? I need to go ahead and take a nap. I think most of us are not like that. So Lemaisa again, it's interesting because again, it makes sense. In other words, I'm sitting down to a heavy meal, right? I'm drinking a glass of wine. In other words, obviously, so that's what Shmuel is saying. Anytime you change your diet, by definition, it changes everything else is going on in your day. So therefore, even for kids, it's like this. So therefore, we don't introduce new information on Shabbos because kids are not really on their game necessarily on Shabbos. So we'll say, listen to this. Let's go back for just a moment. So now we've established that when a Rebbe gets paid, when a Rebbe teaches Chumash, he's not getting paid for teaching Chumash because he can't get paid for teaching Torah. What is he getting paid for? One opinion says babysitting. Second opinion says teaching trup. So the Gemara says the opinion that says trup, why doesn't he say babysitting? Kasav, this is great. Kasavar banos mi bayan shimar. Rabbi say, now this is absolutely fascinating. When we speak about teaching Chumash, Rabbi say this is fascinating. The Gemara presupposes you're teaching Chumash to girls as well, not just boys. Teaching Chumash to girls as well. And everyone knows girls don't need babysitting. Quite fascinating. I don't know. My wife teaches first grade at Beis Yaakov. I'm not sure she would agree with that, right? But Lamaisa, again, I would say, but at least in other words, girls, it's actually incredible. If you take a look, by the way, if you take a quick look at the Ran, but it's like in the middle of the Ran. The Ran says it's almost, I will say, it's pretty much right across. Well, a little bit. I'm just going to read it to you. He says, girls, he says, avabonos afilu kanos lobo shimu she'in darkon lotseis lochotz. I will say what the Gemara is pointing out over here is girls generally will sit in place more than boys. So the requirement of shimur, the requirement of watching them, is much less by girls than it is by boys. Okay, so the Gemara goes weiter. And I will say ultimately again the opinion that says that the Rebbe gets paid for babysitting. Why doesn't he say trup? Kasar, I will say, here we go. Kasavar pisuk tamim da'oraisahu. Here it is. I will say, here it is. I will say we've been operating this entire time thinking that trup is drabanan. To which the other opinion says, no, that's not true. Trup is daraisa. Now what happens if trup is daraisa? If trup is daraisa, then you can't get paid for the teaching of trup in the same way that you can't get paid for what? For the teaching of the psukim. In other words, the whole idea of saying that when a Rebbe teaches Chumash, he's getting paid for trup and not for psukim presupposes that trup is darabanan, that's why you can get paid for it. But if you hold that trup is daraisa, then the same way that the teaching of Chumash, ma'ani bechinam afatem bechinam, the same way that the teaching of Chumash has to be free, has to be without compensation, so too the teaching of trup. Damrab Ika bar Avin Amrab Chanana Amarav, Maid the Amrab will say, what's the meaning of the pasuk? I will say, you know what, we'll have to stop over here for today. And I will say, I think we're fine. We're right on schedule. Already. Oh no, we're not. Right? No. Okay. Good. We're right exactly where we need to be. I will say, don't worry. Baruch Hashem. We'll pick up here tomorrow. Miras Hashem. We're great. It's a shorter Mesilas Yesharim tomorrow. Miras Hashem. So we'll start promptly at 5:55 in Miras Hashem. I will say, Shkayach. It could be Miras Hashem. Thank you. All right, have a great day, everyone. Amen.